Hey cats, what's happening? It's that time of year. It's garden time. And I've been trying to take full advantage of the weather. Uh, Yesterday it poured down rain. It rained last night. It's supposed to rain more today. Fortunately, though, I was able to get my garden ready just before the rains hit. I was able to get my garden in. Now, I still got to plant the plants that I have up there, but everything is prepared for planting. The first thing I did uh, was to buy 2 yards of mushroom compost. Now that's a whole heaping pickup truck load. And I backed up here to the garden and I shoveled it over the whole garden. So I probably had, about 3 or 4 inches thick of mushroom compost over this whole thing. What's mushroom compost? From what I understand, they grow mushrooms in the old abandoned salt mines. And some of those go underneath Lake Erie here in northern Ohio. So they go down into the salt mines and they create these big bins, like raised bins, and they put the compost in there and they raise those button mushrooms, or mushrooms that they sell at the supermarket. From what I understand, they can only use the compost one year, and then they have to get rid of it and replace it with new compost. So I can go to the yard and get this mushroom compost and put it on my garden. Now, why that? It's super high in nitrogen, and my plants absolutely love it. So I spread that over there. Then I got my tiller out, my hand tiller, and I rototilled the whole thing. I went this way back and forth, and then I went this way back and forth until I had it pulverized really well. And after tilling it, I raked everything all out level, and it's ready for planting. After I did that, yesterday I had to put this wire fence up to keep the critters out of my garden, the rabbits, the deer, the raccoons. Without it, there was already deer tracks in my garden the day after I tilled it. So without my fence, the critters would destroy my garden. But hope is that today I can get my vegetables planted in here. It's supposed to rain, but it's supposed to rain later this afternoon. Hopefully it's not too muddy from the rains that we had. I do have my muck boots on because I expect that my boots are going to be caked by the time I walk out of there. But I think my plants will be happy. Now, it's early in May. Usually I don't plant till the middle of May. But when you look at the forecast, there's no sign of frost anywhere in the near future. So it's a perfect time to get your garden in early. The other thing I did was to spread lime on the garden this year because I was told that the tomatoes need lime. In fact, the lime helps them to ripen. If you got tomatoes that are on the vine and they're staying green and they're not turning red, there's a possibility that your garden needs a little bit of garden lime. I'm going to sit down here to relax for a minute and tell you a story about gardening. A little disclaimer: you may or may not be interested in this, but it's been part of my story, so I wanted to share some of the details with you today. Ever since I was a teenager, I smoked marijuana, and trying to save a few dollars, my buddy and I thought, well, let's grow our own. But I had no clue what I was doing. But we had collected some seeds out of some of the bags that we bought. Back then you bought like a nickel bag, a lid, or an ounce. I think the nickel bag was 1/4 of an ounce, and that was about the cheapest that you could buy. But they all had seeds in it, So you'd roll up a joint and you'd be smoking it, and the seeds would pop like popcorn and sparks would go flying all over the place. Anyway, we thought we'd grow our own. So I had like one of those red Solo cups, and I put some dirt in there, and I put some seeds in there, and I stuck them in the window of my bedroom behind the curtain, hoping that my parents wouldn't find it. And sure enough, they sprouted and they grew to like little plants. So I had no idea what I was doing, and I thought, oh, cool, man, I can cut this off, dry it, and smoke it. But it really didn't have much effect. So I thought, well, I need to learn more about this. I think I was about 17 years old, and I went to I drove into town, and I went to the bookstore, the big bookstore. And I searched down the aisles to gardening, and sure enough, I found a book called The Child's Garden of Grass. And it had everything I needed to know about growing marijuana. And it was very interesting. I read it cover to cover. And I learned a lot about the marijuana plant. And I find it to be a very interesting plant. And I don't know if you know much about it or not. Not that I'm trying to encourage or educate you, but this is just kind of sharing some of the knowledge that I have. That the plant has both a male and a female plant. Now, if you had the seeds, you didn't know what was going to come up, if it was going to be a male plant or a female plant. The interesting thing is the male plant has a flower, a little white flower that blossoms. The female plant has what they call flower today, or buds, but the male plant actually has a blossoming flower. The female plant, not so much. The female plant has these sticky colas things, the buds that grow on the plant. So what happens is when the male plant gets mature enough, it starts to put out these little white buds, little white blossoms like, and when the blossom opens, it kind of go pop, and it pops open into a little white blossom, and it throws out microscopic pollen. The pollen drifts over and gets on the female colas, and that's what produces the seeds. So the female will produce all the seeds. So back then, of course, back in the 70s, all the pot we bought had seeds in it because the male plant really doesn't have much use to, other than its natural function of pollinating the female plant. You don't really want, if you're a pot smoker, you don't want the male plant. It's about useless. If you wanted to grow pot and you didn't want seeds in your pot, as soon as you realized it was a male plant, you'd have to cut it down before it blossomed. So there wouldn't be any male flowers to pollinate your females. And then you could get seedless buds on the female plant. So I always thought that was intriguing. I thought that was very interesting because I don't know of many plants that have like a male and a female plant. So that's somewhat unique. I mean, I'm sure there's other plants around the world that have interesting ways that they function in that degree. But anyway, I was able to step up my my growing a little bit better, and I was actually able to grow some pot. But the problem is, my buddy and I, we would plant them out on this gas line because it was open area, there was sunshine there, and it was pretty much an area where nobody ever went. Problem is, our plants got maybe about a foot, maybe about 18, 20 inches tall, and they weren't really big enough to do anything with for a marijuana smoker anyways. But we went to check on them one day and they were gone. We wanted to blame the neighbor kid, thinking that he stole our plants. Truth be known, the deer probably came in there and chewed them off down to the ground. There was no sign of them anywhere. So back in those days, I didn't have good luck with growing at all, and I was never able to really produce anything that was worth a nickel. Now, there was one particular year, and I wasn't really growing any, but I was, a high school hippie, I guess. And I was home, and I was in the shower, and my dad came busting into the bathroom, and he was furious. And he said, "Get yourself out of the shower and get dried off. I'm taking you down to the jail. I'm taking you to the sheriff's office." And I go, "What?" So I get out of the shower, I dry myself off, I pull my pants on, and I'm like, "What's going on?" And he's got this big garbage bag, and he says, "I got all your marijuana right here that you were growing out in the woods. I found your marijuana." I said, "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about, but I didn't have any marijuana out in the woods." And he said, "You're not growing marijuana?" I said, "No. I honestly, I wasn't." I said, "Perhaps it was one of the neighbors, but it's definitely not mine." And I mean, we lived in a rural area, so the neighbors weren't very close around, but if you were going to grow it, you're probably going to take a hike somewhere and put it somewhere remotely away from your own property where if it got found, they wouldn't know where it came from. Somehow my dad had marched out in the middle of the woods somewhere, for reasons I have no idea, and found this maybe 3 or 4 plants that he pulled up by the roots, and he stuffed them in a trash bag. And he was sure that I was the one that was growing them. And I had a hard time convincing him, but I said, "Dad, those are not mine." I said, I swear, those are not mine. I don't know where they came from. I said, "I can ask around, but I don't think anybody's going to tell me." But I said, "Definitely nothing that I did." I said, "I'm not growing any marijuana." So he finally cooled down, and I don't know what he did with this stuff, but that was the last I ever heard of that. Boy, that had me shook up a little bit, though. Later on in the years, though, when I moved out here into the country, I was able to grow some weed, and back in that time, this would have been in the 90s. It was illegal to grow here in Ohio, and so I'd have to hide it in places on the property that would get as much sunshine as it could possibly get, but not be out in the open where it could be easily spotted. And in our rural area, they did spot for marijuana, and what they would do is they'd fly these helicopters over, and they'd go back and forth, and they had like infrared cameras, because from what I understand, the marijuana grows hotter than any other plant around. It produces heat energy, and so the infrared cameras could pick it up, but only if it was growing in like a patch. Well, if you had a whole bunch of plants together in one place, one plant by itself would be very difficult for an infrared camera to pick up flying over with the helicopter. But they did fly over my property when I had my plants out, and I only would do like 3 plants or something, and I'd have them all spaced around different places. So they never found them. But one particular year, my plants were doing very well, and I was getting pretty tickled with them. And I had a dispute with my ex, and she decided to and I don't know if it was an idle threat or if she actually did. She told me that she called the sheriff on me and she was going to have me arrested for growing marijuana. So I didn't waste any time. I went out and I cut all my plants down and I buried them, and that was the end of that. And the sheriff never did show up, so it was a false threat that she made at me. But that was the end of that growing season right there. Only 1 year was I actually successful, and the weed that I grew was really high quality too, so I was pretty happy about that. But that only really happened one time. And I really hadn't done anything since that point. You know, I went through my divorce and everything, so I kind of cleaned up my act, and I didn't want to smoke pot anymore. I didn't want to drink anymore, and I got away from that. Um, but after my wife came down with cancer, she had a small lung cancer, which is, you know, a deadly form of cancer. Life expectancy is 1 year, although she made it 4.5 years. She fought a hard battle. But one of the things she asked me was, do you think marijuana will help me? And I said, boy, I don't know. I mean, you certainly don't want to smoke it. You got small cell lung cancer. So I said, let me do a little research on this, because I said, I know there's different ways that you consume it. You know, they have the edibles, and then I think they have the oils or whatever, different things. So I found out that in Ohio they made it legal for the medical marijuana dispensaries. Well, I kind of looked into that, and I called and talked to some of the experts with the Ohio Medical Marijuana Bureau. And they said, yes, you know, it can be helpful, especially to patients with cancer. So, you know, we suggest you can go ahead and get your medical marijuana license, and then you can purchase the medical marijuana. And because of her condition, because she was not feeling very well, and, you know, I was the one that went ahead and got the license for her, so I was buying it for her. I never bought any for myself. I had no reason to. I'm not a smoker anymore, and I really can't deal with the effects of it. You know, I mean, it makes you lethargic, it makes your mind foggy, it makes you lazy, gives you the munchies, and I don't need that in my life right now. But I went to the dispensary, and I was able to buy some stuff for her. So I brought this out to show you. This is what a medical marijuana prescription looks like, and it's just like a prescription you would get at the drugstore. It has, you know, the information on here, pretty much detailed information on the amount of THC in this, and you know what you can expect. And what she used was a tincture. So you see, it's kind of like an oil in there. This is called Butterfly Effect tincture. It tastes really funky. It has all the medical information on there. And she would take the eyedropper, probably take about that much of this oil, and then she would put it right under her tongue. And I'm not going to do that because I don't need this stuff. Maybe one day I will need it, so I'm not throwing it away. And I paid a pretty good penny for this. This bottle of tincture from medical marijuana was about $125. But it goes a long way when you're just doing a little bit at a time. But how did it affect her? She absolutely loved it. She said, and I would ask her, I said, do you feel high? You know, like you smoked a joint or anything? And she said, no, not at all. But she said, it took away my pain. It made me feel so much better. And it increased my appetite, because she had no appetite. She was withering away. She wasn't eating. So she was able to do the tincture, and she did it every night before bed. And she said it helped me to sleep very soundly. It increased my appetite. And she said, I just think it's great. So she recommended it for her situation. Now, was she a pot smoker? No. She never smoked pot. She didn't want anything to do with it. So, but this worked for her. So there was a benefit to it. So like I said, I'm not condoning it. I'm not encouraging anybody to try that. If you are a cancer patient It might be something worth looking into to help you make it through that journey, because cancer is not a pretty thing. It's ugly, it's horrendous, it usually never ends well. I mean, there are some success stories with cancer, but there's more uh, stories that have gone the opposite way too. The cancer research goes on, and they still don't have a cure for it. They have ways to prolong your lifespan, as they did with my wife, rather than her pass. If she wouldn't have gotten treatment, she would have passed away within 1 year. But being that she did get the treatment, they were able to prolong her life for 4.5 years before the cancer finally took her. Well, without her, I have grief. I still have grief. I mean, I lost the best half of me. She's gone now. And with springtime here, my workload has increased incredibly. I mean, I've got the lawn to mow, I've got gardening to do, I've got weeds to pull, and I still have a house to maintain. And the workload is pretty heavy, and it's hard for one person to do everything. But I've been working my butt off. So, in that regard, I haven't been doing a lot of motorcycle riding this week because every day has just been busting my butt, killing myself, trying to get things done around here. And as I told you today, I want to get my garden planted. So I've got my hands full, and my housework has been lacking. I'm embarrassed. Not that I make a mess, but I have 2 cats in there, and so there's cat hair everywhere, and it needs a good once over. But I haven't had time to mess with that right now. So, hopefully the rain holds out for a couple hours anyways and gives me a chance to get busy here. And I do need to get busy. Thanks for all your prayers, and I continue to pray for you guys. Thanks for your support, for hitting the like button there, the thumbs up thing. That helps to kind of boost my ratings up a little bit. If you haven't yet, please subscribe along and join us on this ride. And we'll get back to the motorcycle here in a couple weeks as soon as I get all this work done. It just keeps coming, you know. It's one thing after another. But it's good for me. It's healthy. You got to stay active. You know, being retired, I got to stay active. I got to stay busy. I can't just sit around and mope and wither away. Well, I don't think I'd wither away. I think I would bloat away because I would just keep eating and, drowning in my own sorrow and eating and trying to soothe my grief. It doesn't work. It's not a healthy option at all in any way, shape, or form. So, well, anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'll catch all you guys later.